because today I'll not be taking the full class, full 1 hour. My throat and voice are actually quite bad. So I won't be taking this full 1 hour. Already 9 minutes is over, and I'll probably end a little early. And no evening class today also. I've been asked to give voice rest. I was scared that I was having COVID with this voice, but my RTR, RT-PCR has come negative. So I'm okay. Right. So what were we doing the last time? Somebody should know. Hmm? We were doing the introduction to Plato, and I was talking to you about the various influences on Plato. One of the most significant influence is Socrates, who Plato considered him to be his teacher. And then you have a little bit of influence. You have a little bit of influence of uh, Parmenides, and you also have the influence of Pythagoras, about whom I was talking to you yesterday. And apart from Pythagoras, a very funny sort of an influence from in the form of Protagoras. So I was basically trying to tell you that there are different influences. All these influences culminated in Plato writing his philosophy. So if people are Parmenides, Socrates, and Pericles, I told you, because after the Peloponnesian War, there was the very famous Periclean oration, where Pericles tried to pinpoint the various reasons why Athens lost the war to Sparta. So That is another influence on Plato, the Peloponnesian War, which was fought in the province of Peloponnese. And like I said, these days we call it Gnosticism, but technically the Greeks actually called it Gnosticism. Gnosticism is what they called it. The Romans called it Gnosticism, so we'll go by the Roman this thing for the time being. Or if you like, I'll use the Greek this thing of Gnosticism that you find in Protagoras. So if we look at all these multiple influences on Plato, then we have to try and make sense of his basic magnum opus, which is the Republic. Now, in English, the Republic is a very bad translation. It is, in fact, a misnomer because Plato didn't want a republic. What Plato wanted was the rule of a philosopher king or a group of people who were called philosopher kings. We'll come to that as we start studying Plato more seriously. And you will see that Plato didn't want a democracy either. Let me clear this. I think I already talked to you about it. But just in case some of you may have missed it, please remember that there was no democracy in any of the provinces or any of the polis, Poleis, which is the plural of polis, Polis, from which we derive the word political and politics. Okay, it is from that the word comes. So there was no Greek police, which, or rather, there were no Greek police, which practiced democracy. In fact, if you ask Plato, Plato will tell you that a democracy is nothing but mob rule. He called it a mobocracy. So he was not somebody who was very keen on having a democracy. In fact, he was quite keen on not having a democracy. Now you must understand that Plato is an exceptional philosopher for his time. There are many reasons for it, and I will tell you those reasons as we go through uh, Plato. Now, what you must understand about Plato is that he is perhaps the world's first philosopher to have first philosopher in the world to have talked about a meritocracy. Okay, meritocracy is people with merit to rule. So he had a meritocracy in mind, which is the first ever uh, documented evidence that we have of a philosopher talking about this. The other thing is Plato's emphasis on education. There are two philosophers who have emphasized the necessity for good education. If you look at these two philosophers, one of them is Plato, and much later, the other is Rousseau, much later. Rousseau, in fact, wrote a treatise on education, which is called the Emile, but that is jumping the gun. Let's not get to Rousseau straight away. Let's stick to Plato. Plato is one of the first, or probably the first philosopher to realize the importance of education, and his meritocracy, where people of merit rule, is derived from the education system. Now, there are a number of confusions about Plato. So let's start by getting rid of these confusions. Now, if you look at Plato, Plato is seen as a totalitarian thinker by Karl Popper, who's a scientist, a great scientist, and a great philosopher of the 20th century. He wrote a 2-volume work called The Open Society and Its Enemies, in which he starts with Plato as an enemy of open society and comes right down to Marx and says he is also an enemy of an open society. Now, I want you to remember one thing. Whatever we are doing, we are doing as history of ideas. Political thought should be studied as history of ideas. And ideas are born in various different contexts. An idea cannot exist without a context from which it emanates. The name of the scientist is Karl Popper, Karl, Karl, Popper, Karl Popper. Okay, so you cannot have an idea without the context. So if you're looking at Karl Popper, what Karl Popper actually succeeded in doing is misrepresenting Plato. Why are we saying this? We are saying this because of the fact that the idea of open society is a modern idea. If you remember, I have told you that, you know, the 16th century is when the modern period begins, and it is from the 16th century that you have the slow, that is the crucial word, slow movement towards an open society. So what is an open society? An open society is that which basically emphasizes individual freedoms. It places the individual ahead of society. So let me explain this to you with an example. Aristotle very famously said, what is good for society is good for the individual. This is what Aristotle said. What is good for society is good for the individual. He also went on to say that a good polis breeds good citizens who in turn will breed a good polis again. So it's a circular thing. Good polis, good citizens, good citizens, good polis, again, good citizens, good polis. So in that sense, if you look at what Aristotle is doing, is that he is basically saying If there is no society, there is no individual. That's what Aristotle is saying. If there is no society, there is no individual. Whereas in the modern period, people will say, if there is no individual, there is no society. How can you have an organization first and members later? So, in the modern period, when individualism comes into being, you will see that there is a tendency, there is basically a tendency to place individual interests ahead of the interest of whole of society. So what is good for me need not be good for someone else. Okay? So what is good for society? There is no such thing as good for society. That's what people will say. Any good, if it exists, it's only for the sake of the individual. This is what we have today. And individual freedoms. There are different types of individual freedoms. It all starts with a free market. Free market. The operative word, which is extremely important, is free. Free market is one thing. The second thing is freedom of speech. Please don't call it free speech. Free speech has a different meaning. I'll come to that when we are doing John Locke. I'll come to that. It is freedom of speech, not free speech. I pick up a newspaper and I read every day. What do I read? I read free speech. There is no thing as a free speech. And I'll tell you why. There is a thing, but that is not to be applicable to the individual. But I'll tell you that much, much later when we're doing John Locke. You should also understand that another freedom that is extremely important is free will. Will here has to be written with a capital W. Free will. Will here is like willpower. I have the willpower to do something. I will do something. I have the will to do it. So the other freedom that people talk about in the modern period is the free will. So these elements in conjunction with individualism, which I shall explain to you when we come to Locke, they are the ones that created the idea of an open society. Okay? They are the ones that created the idea of an open society, where you must have heard the phrase laissez-faire, Laissez, laissez hyphen FAIRE. Laissez-faire is leave things alone. Don't interfere. So the kind of society that the modern period sees and wants is where the individual will determine for himself as to what he wants or what she wants. The individual will pursue a goal that is of interest. So we live in this time, and therefore we find it difficult to understand the past. All these freedoms, please remember, came only with the modern period in the 16th century. In Plato's time, society came first. So I was giving you an example from Aristotle, where he says what is good for society is good for the individual. This is considered to be an idea of common good. Good is not for an individual. Good is good for an entire society as such. It's not for one individual or two individuals or a majority. It is good for every single person. It is good for every single person who is a part of society. So for people like Plato and Aristotle, society comes first, individual comes later. Now, just in case any of you is wondering, how is it that society comes and individual comes later? Let me give you an example. Can you have a soldier without an army? If you basically have soldiers, that is because you have created an army, or you have decided to create an army. You create an army, you decide to create an army, and then you recruit people into that army. You can't say there is no such thing as an army, but this man is a soldier. That makes no sense. How can you have a soldier without the army? It's like saying there is no such thing as an aeroplane, but this man is a pilot. A pilot is a pilot because there is an aeroplane. Without the aeroplane, a pilot is not a pilot. He cannot be a pilot. So, for people like Plato and Aristotle, you must understand and remember that society comes first. Common good exists. What is good for one is good for all, is not what they are saying. What they are saying is, if there is a thing called good, then it should be good for everyone. And good here is being used in its moral sense, not as virtue. Please remember, because if you talk about it as virtue, then good becomes religious. People like Plato and Aristotle are not talking about that kind of a thing. Okay, they're not talking about a religious good. What they are talking about is the good of everyone, which is a moral thing, but not a religious thing. In fact, one should not be using the word moral here. In the context of ancient Greece, we should be using the term ethics. Now, at one time, ethics and morals were the same. They were the same in the Greek period. They were the same in ancient Indian period. Ethics and morals were both the same things. But with the evolution of the human society, you find that slowly morality and ethicality, or morals and ethics, become two different things. They become two different things. Ethics are derived out of a social ethos. Okay? Ethics are derived out of a social ethos. Morals, on the other hand, are transcendental. When you say morals are transcendental, transcendental means that which rises above everything. Everything, including time and space. So if you say something is a moral, then you're basically saying that irrespective of the time, whichever century, irrespective of the place, Europe, America, Asia, everywhere morality is the same. It rises above time and place. And morality is non-negotiable. You cannot say, I'll argue about why something is good and why something is bad. Morality is normative, and anything that is normative is that which is not available for discussion. Morality is something that you just accept. Ethics, on the other hand, like I said, are derived out of social ethos. This has happened a little later. This has happened post-Christianity. And if you look at this, if you look at ethics as such, ethics can vary from place to place. Let me give you an example so that you understand what is the point that I'm trying to make about ethics and their being derived from a social ethos. If you take the case of premarital sex, two people having sex before marriage, it is perfectly ethical in America. It is perfectly ethical in Europe. In India, sex before marriage, it happens, but it is hidden. Why? Because our social ethos does not permit sex before marriage. So you see, there is a difference. What is okay in Europe and America is not okay in India. Let me give you another example. In South India, okay, not the whole of India. In South India, you can marry, if you're a girl, you can marry your mother's brother, which is you can marry your uncle, or you can marry your mother's brother's son, if you're a girl. If you're a boy, you can marry your father's sister's, mother's brother's daughter. You can marry. Among Muslims, this marriage is allowed, and marriage between children of siblings. If I have a brother and I have a daughter, and my brother has a son, both of them can marry, which is something that you cannot do in Hindu society. Up north, you can't even marry your uncle's daughter. So these are all ethics that are derived out of social ethos. These practices are basically the ones that are absent in America and Europe. They call this kind of marriages, they call them incest. Marrying within the family, close family, is incest. And these people basically cannot understand how they can be incest. But for us, it's no problem. See a typical Telugu movie, Bava. Bava. So you can marry your Bava. Telugu Bava, not the Parsi Bava or the Muslim Bava. The Telugu Bava. So this is not acceptable to the Americans. They look down upon us for this reason. We look down upon them because they openly have premarital sex. All this is ethics. But morals are transcendental. Anywhere in the world, to kill a fellow human being is not acceptable. It is absolutely not acceptable. It becomes murder. So, killing people is not something that any culture basically agrees to. Now, I don't know if you've been following the Disha case. Sajjanar, he saw what happened in the Nirbhaya case. It took some 10 years. It took some 10 years before people were convicted for rape. And unfortunately, one fellow at that time was considered to be a juvenile because he was not 16 years old. So he has been allowed to go free. If he is old enough to rape someone, in my opinion, he is old enough to be punished. But our penal code basically says juveniles cannot be punished. They have to be sent to a borstal school and reformed. Now, Sajjanar knew this. He knew that if you allow this case to fester, justice will not be given in time, and therefore he took people, these three rapists, to the spot, and he said, recreation of the rape scene, and shot all the three of them dead. This is called vigilante justice. Vigilante justice is not acceptable anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. You have to go through the due process of law. Vigilante justice is allowed in Islamic countries like Saudi Arabia and all that. But in the rest of the world, it is not acceptable, including India. So there was a probe. People found that the probe results weren't reflecting things the way they were. So they're going to probe this again, this Disha case, to see if Sajjanar did the right thing or the wrong thing. Everybody knows what Sajjanar did, because this is not the first time that he did this. In 2008, while he was superintendent of police in Warangal, two girls were subject to an acid attack. Three boys threw acid on the face of these two girls who died. So Sajjanar again said, a recreation of the crime scene, and shot all these three people dead. That is vigilante justice. It is justice, but it is vigilante. Social ethos says this is not acceptable. People should be given a right to defend themselves. People should be given a right to defend themselves, and therefore vigilante justice is not acceptable. But in Saudi Arabia, you do something like this, you're not shot, you're stoned. People will throw rocks at you till you die. Stoned to death. So, ethics and morals became separate in the modern period. But in the Greek period, you will see that ethics and morals are not different. They could be used interchangeably. And the idea of good was something which was considered to be ethical, because they didn't see this disconnection between ethics and morals. So for them, for the Greeks, ethics and morals can be used interchangeably, just like philosophy and science. Today we believe philosophy is different from science. The Greeks didn't believe that. Anyway, so to come back to Plato, Plato is trying to establish an ideal society. Ideal. Please keep this word in your mind because Plato's usage of ideal is not our usage of ideal. He wanted to create an ideal society. I'll stop. It says 11:59. Tomorrow when we meet, we will continue with this. So thank you very much to all of you. So see you tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.